Oh no. I'm such a boomer, guys. Sorry for that. Let's get this show started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 92nd episode of the longest tenured Denver Nuggets spin off podcast in the world. Welcome to the DNVR Nuggets' Serbian Corner. My name is Miroslav, and I'd like to remind you to hit that like button if you're watching on YouTube. Subscribe to the DNVR Nuggets podcast if you haven't already. Tell your friends about the show. And if you're a Timberwolves fan, welcome. Your team is awesome, and I'm sure you're enjoying watching them. I want to thank my Patreon supporters, and if you want to support the show more directly, you can do that at patreon.com/MiroslavCuk. The week behind us started rough for the Nuggets. The Timberwolves came back to the Ball Arena for Game 2 of the Western Conference semifinals and kicked the reigning champions' collective ass. We had some optimism before this game because Rudy Gobert couldn't be at the game because of his child being born and also super strong wind not allowing planes to land in Denver that day. Alas, that didn't help the Nuggets offense at all. Everybody on the team was out of sorts. Even Joker looked pretty passive. They lost the first quarter by 8 points, and that lead grew immediately to 20 as soon as the league MVP left the court. It was probably the middle of the second quarter when you could see the Nuggets just giving up on this game. Joker ended up with just 16 points, 16 boards, and 8 assists, but only took 13 shots. Jamal was trying his best to get himself going on a bad leg, but ended up shooting 3 of 18 from the field, which combined with his inability to stay with anyone on defense made his impact catastrophic. Aaron Gordon was the only player ready to hit some shots in the first half, but even he got lost in translation in the second. 0-2 after 2 games at home wasn't on anyone's bingo card before the series started. Last night, Game 3 in Minneapolis. I was super nervous, knowing that the loss would mean almost a certain end to the season. Still, I would have been content even with the team showing great fight, regardless of the result. Great fight we did get, but it also was a wildly differently called game compared to Game 2. The refs, led by Tony Brate, didn't let the Wolves sit on our guys' hips like before. They were calling fouls for it, so Minnesota had to adjust their aggressiveness. On the other hand, the Nuggets matched their physicality and for the first time in these playoffs dictated the tempo of the first quarter. They limited Minnesota to 20 quarter points, and even that would have been lower if the Wolves didn't hit 4 3-pointers in the first. +8 at the first quarter break. Jamal Murray was dancing with the ball again, hitting shots and keeping the ball moving. AG hit 3 3-pointers in a row. MPJ was hitting all the big shots throughout the game. KCP finally figured out how to contain Ant better. And Joker, well, it looks like Joker figured some stuff out. I'm not ready to say he's solved the Wolves' defense yet. Let's wait for Game 4 before making such bold proclamations. We got to see Luka Garza again, but what triggered his minutes this time was the 25-point lead that was on our side this time. All right, that's enough of my ginormous head on the screen. It is time to bring in some reinforcements. Last week, I mentioned how amazing my trip to Denver was, and the pinnacle of it was my 8-hour experience in Ball Arena before, during, and after Game 2 of the Lakers series. And one of the reasons it was so amazing was hanging out for a couple of hours with my guest for today. He is the lawyer in the Wild West, but you know him as the NBA writer for Bleacher Report and one of the first national level writers to recognize the greatness of now three-time MVP and NBA champion Nikola Jokic. He is also the founder of HNI, aka Huge Nerd Index, which is almost as reliable for determining who should win the MVP trophy as Mirostat. And you guys know what Mirostat is. He is one of the best people in the world to talk basketball or Seinfeld with. It's Andrew D. Bailey. Welcome back to the show, Andy.
Thank you, Miroslav. What a glowing intro. That was amazing. I don't think I've ever been introduced better than that. It's always good to be on, and I have to say I had a blast hanging out with you at Ball Arena. That was awesome.
Yeah, it's really crazy to me how many great people I was able to meet that night, including you, of course. Like there were some Lakers reporters. People think that somebody that covers Lakers must be a bad person. No, that's not true. Well, some of them are, but like some of the guys I know, they're really great guys. Also, the other Nuggets reporters in the building as well. So it was a really cool experience for me. So I need to come back to game two for just a minute because it is something that happened this week, and this is like a weekly podcast, so we need to cover that. So, were you at the arena for game two?
I was, and there was like this optimism among all the media before the game, all the Denver media, thinking, okay, we're gonna get back into it. And a lot of people asked me what I thought would happen. And I was just kind of worried about game two. I'm not sure exactly why, but there were moments in game one where it felt like the combination of size and athleticism that Minnesota has was a problem. And it became a huge problem in the first half of that game too. That, and I don't care how many Lakers, Bucks, Sixers, Timberwolves fans came at me on Twitter. Officiating played a role in game two. And I think that became especially clear when you saw how much different things went in game three. But it was like a perfect storm of Minnesota was fired up. Um, Murray still hampered a bit from the calf. Officiating was weird. Minnesota's huge. And it just made this perfect cocktail to have a really weird result in game two.
Um, you're watching a fair amount of games live in Denver since it's not too long of a drive for you from Wyoming. What are the benefits from in arena watching and also being on the sideline while the players are warming up for your work at the Bleacher Report?
Good question. There's actually benefits to both. Like for example, I was beside myself about the officiating during game two, and you could tell the arena was too. There was like this growing tension throughout that big run that the Wolves went on, and you could just feel it in the arena. And I watched some of those plays back on TV later that I thought, what's going on? These are clear fouls. They didn't look as bad on TV. So there are certain things that I think are a little bit easier to see when you have the benefit of replay and commentary and all that stuff. So there are pluses to watching on TV. Watching in person, you get to feel that environment that I just kind of mentioned. I mean, it can get kind of tense in there when things are going wrong, but Ball Arena kind of turns into like it almost feels like a club in the second half when Denver's playing well. The fans get so into it. It gets so loud. And I've often told people that like the combination of that energy that the Ball Arena fans bring and the altitude in Colorado can be really hard for opponents to overcome. So it's cool to feel that. It's really cool to see the players in person. And you got to experience this at the game that you went to actually be on the floor with them when they warm up and see how big these guys are.
Yep.
You don't really see the speed as much because they're just warming up, obviously. But just the sheer size and the shape that these guys are in is pretty remarkable. And the speed does look a little bit different from the stands than it does in TV. But I think really the biggest difference is just how huge these guys are. I mean, I'm talking a lot, but I have one more example. I was years and years and years ago, one of the first things I went to live was a Jazz summer league, and I'm a pretty big guy. Um, I'm bigger than most of the people in the media, and I just was walking down the tunnel at the same time that Alec Burks was coming in the other direction. And on TV, you think Alec Burks is a guard. He looks pretty small next to other NBA players. I passed Alec Burks and was like, "Oh my gosh, that that dude's huge. He's as big as I am." Um, so it's pretty remarkable how big NBA players are in general.
Well, when you say big, you mean how tall they are, right? Because they're pretty
Well,
skinny. They're pretty
tall,
skinny
and
in first person, right?
they're they're skinny, like they're in phenomenal shape.
Yeah, of course.
I'm tall and fat, but like, even Alec Burks, when I walked past him, he looked way thicker and more muscular than I would have guessed. And I don't even know what he's listed at now. I would guess like 6'6", 210 or something like that. But those guys, like he's 210 pounds of all muscle. And that's the case with pretty much every NBA player. Um, and it's just remarkable what they do on that hardwood floor night in and night out. It really is amazing to see them in person.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll get to see Alec Burks at some point in Denver Nuggets. He's
Yeah,
like one of my favorite role
I love
players
Burks.
in the
Yeah,
league. He's great. Another thing I saw there next to the court, like you say, Alec Burks is huge, like LeBron James, man. Like LeBron James is a mountain
huge.
of a person. he
Yeah.
is a mountain, and he is by no means skinny. Like he is
No,
like super ripped and super huge. So that was pretty cool to see
those
there.
guys are
Okay,
just massive. Yep.
so while we are still on game two, I just wanted to fire up one Jokic take, and I just want to see what you think about it. So it's not a positive nor a negative assessment. I just believe Joker is like a computer on the court. He is capable of adjusting his level of aggressiveness to the exact minimum level that is needed to win you a regular season game, thus saving energy and preserving health. This is why the Nuggets never blow out anybody almost during the season. But then that same computer, unfortunately, completely shut him down as soon as it calculated that the team had no chance of coming back into game two. And it is a bad look since the fans did not pay for expensive playoff tickets to watch their favorite players have a cardio practice instead of second half. I might be like pushing the envelope too hard there. You tell me if you don't agree. But a similar thing happened back in 2020 in the bubble in game 3 against Utah. He gave up on that game too before leading his team to a game 7 win. Do you think that is a fair way to describe those two situations, or am I just too giant of a double homer so I cut too much slack for Joker?
No, I definitely think there's some truth to that, especially in the regular season. And my first reaction as you were laying out the theory is, maybe the counter is some of the big comebacks that they have had. But then I thought, well, maybe his inner computer is just so dialed in that he's better aware of when they have a shot than I am. Um, I can't. What I think it was game 2. It was the game that you went to when Murray hit the
Yeah.
first game winner, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Minus
I
20.
I had given up on that game in terms of the Nuggets being able to come back and win. Um, and so maybe maybe the supercomputer in Jokic's brain still saw that there was, a 2% chance to pull it off, and so he just keeps plugging along. But um I have seen games. I think it's less common than it was early in his career, but there are games where he seems to disengage a little bit. Especially if the team on the other side comes out super hot at the start. He can still, I think, occasionally get rattled by the way a game is being officiated. He's much better at that than he was early in his career. But I think there could be something to your theory there. He thinks, I think he thinks the game in a way that few others ever have in the history of the league. I think that's part of this is kind of a tangent now, but people on Twitter are constantly posting clips of him just kind of waving at guys as they go to the rim when he's inside. But I think that's part of the calculations that he makes too. Like he thinks, I'm probably not going to get up and block this guy. So why am I going to risk a foul?
That's
Um,
right.
why am I going to risk that 1% energy drain? Like when he needs to turn it up defensively, or if he thinks he has an opportunity to make a play, he will. Um, but he's just not. It's incredible the way he's sort of dialed into when he can and cannot waste effort. It's really interesting.
Uh, Most of the Nuggets fans have been with this team for a long time now, and they can recognize the ebbs and flows of his game on defense. What you mentioned about him letting guys like have free layups, and it's actually the opposing fans that are angry because he's not making fouls there. Like, why
Yeah,
don't you engage? Why don't you help us by being a dumb guy and fouling out like a cat? But yeah, I agree. It's a bad look if you only take a look at the clips, and I'm guessing like some of the national media hot take creators are only
yeah,
watching the clips because they don't have the time to do more than that. And everything is a clip nowadays. Like if you seen my question to Joker at the press conference after game 2, it was a question that was a relatively long one. The answer was much better than that, but the clip that made to the social media of ESPN and stuff like that was 5 seconds long. It was Joker saying "ciao," "hey
hmm
ciao," and I'm answering "ciao" back to him, and that's it. Like this is all the big media is uh, talking about. So it is what it is. Okay, let's take one short break, and then we'll finally move to game 3. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we are back. And by the way, I had a bunch of pretty depressing questions I wrote for you after game 2 that are completely obsolete after last night's game. And I hope I won't have the opportunity to use them at all this year. Let's move to last night's game. So I admit I was dead wrong. I thought Jamal couldn't possibly get so much healthier in 4 days to look as good as he looked last night. So is it just his burst and lift that improved, or did you see any tactical adjustments from the Nuggets coaching team that helped him completely turn things around?
I think the time off was probably the biggest factor. Um, if it was a relatively mild calf strain, I don't think we've had a ton of reporting on the severity of it. I would assume it's mild because he's been playing through it. 4 days can make a big difference. So that's certainly part of it. He did look more explosive to me. His first step looked quicker. He seemed like he was getting a little more lift on his jump shot. He had a nice dunk at one point. So I think that's the biggest part of it. But I actually noticed even in game 2, and obviously it didn't work out in game 2, but I was thinking after game 1, they might have to get him off the ball a little bit quicker. And they had Aaron Gordon initiating stuff a little bit more in game 2. I think that carried over into game 3 as well. They had other guys bringing the ball up the floor a bit more in games 2 and 3, which I think helps because it's got to be a pain in the rear to get hounded up and down the floor by Anthony Edwards and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. Um, One thing that Jokic said, I don't know if you saw his post-game spot with Scott Van Pelt. Nicola Aesthetic on Twitter posted it. He's a great account.
Yeah.
Scott Van Pelt asked him what was the difference between tonight and the earlier games, and Jokic just quickly said, "We got the ball up. We got the ball past half court in 2 or 3 seconds." Um, and I think that's huge. I think if you spend, and this is something that Murray does a lot throughout the regular season for the last couple of years. You have 8 seconds to get the ball across half court. He seems to want to take that full 8 seconds a lot of times. Um, but I think if you push the way that Denver did in game 3, it makes it harder for Minnesota to set up that half court defense. It kind of puts them on their heels a little bit. I think just being a little bit snappier with the actions made a big difference in game 3.
Yeah, I agree with that. Jamal looked really healthy. Like he
Yeah.
had some super impressive uh, cuts to the basket, like finishing around the rim, finishing on the as we call it, on the second basket, on the other side. He was really impressive. His shot was also getting in. By the way, do you feel that his arc is not super high comparing to some other superstar shooters, but it's still like so pure when it's going in?
I have never really thought of that, so now I'll probably pay attention to it a bit more than usual. I feel like a lot of his, at least like his step back threes and stuff, like you said, they look about as pure as any fadeaway jumper um, in the league. That's I've a lot of people ask me for Jamal Murray comps, and I always say he's kind of a hybrid between Kobe and Curry. And the way he shoots threes kind of reminds me of Curry at times. Um, but Curry has kind of a moon ball. So
Mhm.
so now I'm gonna pay a little bit closer attention to the arc on Jamal Murray's shot.
Yeah, I just
Did it
feel
look
like
did it look better in game 3 in that regard than in game 2? Or does it always
it
look flat to you?
it always looks pretty flat to me, which is crazy because I know how good of a shooter he is, and I'm always like, oh man, that ball that does not have enough arc. And it's like a swish. It's like
Then it hits the
not
back of the
touching
rim.
anything. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
it's like super smooth. So yeah, I was really impressed with Jamal. I was even suggesting that the Nuggets should contemplate playing him way fewer minutes comparing to game 2, because I thought, like, if he's not healthy enough, try to win with defense, try to have like a super solid defensive um, uh, five on the court. But you know what? They had pretty awesome defense with Jamal playing 38 minutes last
They
night. They limited Minnesota to 90 points, which is pretty good. Pretty good. By the way, what do you think about Ant Edwards' game last night? Do you think
um
the Nuggets did it to him, or was he just not super inspired last night?
I would think more of the Nuggets did it to him. Because I don't he plays with like a fire and intensity in every game that I don't it doesn't really come and go in my experience. He's one of those guys who's pretty much always engaged. From my experience watching him, especially in the playoffs. Like he's been absurd in the playoffs the last 2 years. I think and I was kind of wondering if they would do this after game 1. They put a little bit more size on him over the course of the game. In game 3, I think they did a little bit better job of denying him the ball too. Um, Christian Brown and Aaron Gordon, I think, are probably the 2 best options that Denver has to defend him. And I think we'll continue to see a little bit more of those 2 guys on him. And maybe there was a bit of disengagement. He had that huge game against the Suns in the first round where I think he scored 31 in the second half. And there was never really any need for him to go crazy in game 3 because Denver had pretty much put it away by about I don't know. Minnesota made a run at some point in the third quarter that cut it to like 12 or 13, but Denver quickly answered. And from there, it was pretty clear how it was going to end.
By the way, this is probably a dumb take, but I just have to address it. Minnesota looked really good on offense without Gobert in their lineup. Like, they were really, really good on offense, and they came back to like their clunky themselves, in game 3. Uh, if Gobert cannot help the Wolves be super stout on defense against Joker, and we're going to talk about Joker right now. I'm not sure he won't be like played out of the game like he was in some certain playoff series in his past.
I think there's something to this, and if the series continues the way that it looked in game 3, they're probably going to have to think about playing him a little bit less. I'm one of the few who actually thinks that Gobert's been kind of underrated offensively over the course of his career, but he has to be in a pretty idealized offensive situation for his skills to work. And I think Minnesota has those lineups. the idealized situation is Rudy Gobert and 4 shooters. Sometimes Minnesota can pull that off, but it's also kind of clunky because, Towns is used to having plenty of post-ups earlier in his career. There are certainly nights when Edwards and McDaniels do not look like shooters. So if it's not rolling for those guys from the outside, it can get pretty clunky with Gobert. And you're right. I mean, the offense looked like it was humming in game 2. So I'm sure they're at least talking about it in Minnesota's locker room. I read somewhere, I can't remember who wrote this, but I'm pretty sure Tim Connolly talked to Chris Finch when he made the Gobert trade and said, I don't want you to take him out at the end of games. And so I think they've made kind of a concerted effort to try and beat that Gobert can be played off the floor narrative. But if there's a team offensively and defensively who can make it look kind of weird for Gobert out there, it might be Denver.
Yeah. And Harrison Wind had a very interesting tweet about that run the Nuggets made in the third quarter last night. He said Nikola figured out what he should be doing against the Wolves defense. And we know from the previous seasons, it gets tough for the opponent when he outsmarts their coach. Did you see something specific, different with Joker's approach to the game comparing to games? Well, game 1, basically, because it's a Gobert led Timberwolves team.
I don't know if I saw something specific. I did see that tweet from Harrison, and I wonder if he's expounded on that a little bit. But this kind of goes back to the supercomputer discussion that we had earlier. There are multiple examples of series in Jokic's career where it looks like it's going to be kind of an uphill battle for the first 2 or 3 games, and then he does seem to figure something out. I don't know if he's figured out the way that Gobert was sort of timing those, the way that he was defending that alley-oop action to Gordon when he's on the dunker spot was pretty impressive. In game 1, he was phenomenal at both staying with Jokic and scrambling back to the dunker spot when the pass went up, and he was timing those pretty well. I don't know if Jokic has just kind of figured out a better way to fake him out. Maybe slightly more hesitation before he throws the pass. Like the most minuscule adjustment from the offensive player can be just enough to get that pass from point A to point B. My brother was years and years and years ago, he was a really good college basketball player. He was the Mountain West Player of the Year. Phenomenal player. And I used to guard him when we'd play pickup, and he could send me flying with just like the most subtle twitch of his eyes, really, and like a slight hesitation to go along with it. And I think Jokic is just a master of pump fakes, manipulation with his eyes, with the ball. And so, again, I'm not sure I have a specific, I saw that difference while I was playing, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's figured out, okay, if I manipulate him a little bit more this way towards me on that offense, then the pass will be there. He really does adjust on the fly over the course of a series in a way that maybe nobody else in my time covering the NBA has.
There's this possession that is being replayed on Twitter right now where Joker is being guarded by Anthony Edwards, and he makes a move.
Spin move?
Spin move. But right before the spin move, both Gobert and Ant go to their right, and Joker rolls to his right, and he's now completely free. And he's even making that like off the glass shot with no hope of hitting the basket, but he knows that he has the rebound there. It's just those subtleties. It's just crazy to see him work, and he actually needs to do all of those things because Gobert was recovering really quickly on that possession too. Like he really needed to thread the needle there. So kudos to Gobert. Honestly, like he is by far, I think, the best help side defender against Joker, and they did make that crazy good defensive lineup against Joker. But I don't know if Game 3 is, and we are of course always using the recency bias. So now it feels like the rest of the series is gonna
Right.
go the way Game 3 is. I mean, who knows? We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But one thing that's probably a bit unsettling to the Timberwolves staff is the fact that they know when Joker uh, solves some things, it's really hard to find counters. On the other side, Game 4 might be the last game of this series where we'll be able to see big moves by either of the coaching staffs. Do you agree? Like, that's probably the last time we're gonna see a big counter, and then after that, the teams are probably gonna be out of counters.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And maybe the big counter for Minnesota is what we mentioned already. Maybe you play Gobert a little bit less, um, try and spread Denver out a little bit more when they're on offense. I have been thinking throughout this series, and it finally happened in Game 3. Minnesota just wasn't a great offensive team all season, and it could have something to do with what we talked about, that there's still just a little bit of clunkiness with the Gobert Towns front court. Um, and I just kept thinking, is that version of the Timberwolves going to show up at some point in this series? I think prior to Game 3, they had the top offense in the NBA in the playoffs, like just a complete 180 from what they were in the regular season. So they might have to think about doing something dramatic. And you're not going to bring Gobert off the bench. You're not going to play him less than 20 minutes or anything like that. But even just playing him like 24, 25 is a pretty big adjustment. But then, there's give and take with every adjustment that you make in the playoffs. I mean, if you take Gobert off for 5, 6 more minutes a game, then you're opening yourself up to a potential onslaught from the Nuggets offense. Like it's going to be a tricky line for them to walk.
I talked to a friend today. We were playing basketball. We always play basketball on Saturdays for many years now, and we're all like old, so this is why we can still play. Like nobody's quick on the court, so that's fine. And he asked me, "Oh, so the Nuggets won?" Like, yeah, they did. So how many points did Joker have? I'm like, man, that's like totally irrelevant. Like, like, but did he have 30? Like, it's irrelevant, man. Like, he is not the guy that will impose his will by scoring 50. He's a guy that will make sure his team is playing well, and they finally did. This was their 8th game of these playoffs, and the
Yeah.
first game where they started the game actually well. How much do you think of it goes to Joker and his approach to games? Like, should he be the one to take the biggest blame of the Nuggets being pretty lethargic at the beginning of these playoffs?
Um, I tend to think that's mostly on the coach. Um, but there is some responsibility when you're the best player on your team and you're the best player in the world, and guys follow the example of the best player on the team. And there were definitely moments in the first couple games and in the Lakers series uh, where I felt he was kind of just playing in like second or third gear. Um, and he's an interesting player to cover and watch because you don't know if it's like disengagement or if it's him just like out thinking the game, like we were talking about earlier. Because throughout I mean, as long as I've been covering the NBA, for everybody else, that's disengagement. Um, and there are still moments where I'm watching him and I think, gosh, I wish he would have just shot that. Um, he'll be 8 feet from the rim. There's not really been anybody in a position to contest, and he'll still kick it out to the 3-point line. And that can be a little bit weird to watch as well. But I think that he's constantly trying to get everybody involved. I think at the end of the games that helps because everybody's engaged, everybody's confident that they're going to get the ball when they're open. Um, and he's kind of got his energy stores saved up for the end of the game, like we talked
Yeah.
about earlier. I think there are examples of when he's like, I have to take over as a scorer. There was that game in Phoenix. I think it was in Phoenix last year when he had 50 something. And I was thinking after game 2, like the only way they're going to beat the Timberwolves is if he goes into that mode. And wrong again, Andy. Like he's he's able to engineer a win playing his way in game 3. So it's really interesting how he challenges our ideas and our thinking about basketball.
We have a great comment from Dan Lynch here. He says, "Ooh, should Jokic take the blame game? Why? Miro is gonna turn me into Nicola's lawyer." By the way, Dan is actually a lawyer. Like we
That's
have
good.
several lawyers on this podcast right now. Well,
Yeah, I'm
wait,
sure he's got
Dan.
exhibits to present on that.
wait until the end of this show because nobody's higher on Joker than Andy and I. So don't worry about it. We're just like warming you guys up with some stuff we need to talk about. I mean, it's fair to talk about. I'm really frustrated by the way the Nuggets are playing in these playoffs, but on the other hand, they've had a really long last season. It's really hard to repeat because of that, because they're playing so much more basketball comparing to other teams. So it makes sense that the Timberwolves are much fresher. They have some young guys on their squad that are really impressive already. So it makes sense that they found some energy against the Nuggets. What's mind-boggling to me is the way the Lakers had a lot of energy against the Nuggets uh, in the first round. Now that was just Nuggets playing with their food, I think, and
Yeah.
it goes to the same point we've been making several times already on this show. Okay, let's take one more break and then we'll talk a bit about the other guys. Don't go anywhere. Okay, Andy. So I thought all of MPJ, Aaron Gordon, and KCP were excellent on defense last night. KCP finally had some success defending, and but they were also ready to hit important shots throughout the game. AG and MPJ combined for 7 of 9 from beyond the arc, and the team shot a very efficient 14 of 29 from the deep. Not a lot of 3-point attempts, but almost 50% there. What did you see from these three guys? And do you think shooting had a huge role in last night's game, or was it like just a side story?
Shooting?
Yeah. Because,
Yeah,
Minnesota was like 10 of 31 or whatever
yeah, I
at the
think
same
that played
time.
a huge role. I haven't updated this. I can't remember when I did it. It was maybe a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, but just just attempting more threes than the other team. The team that took more threes in a game was like 27-5 or something in the playoffs to that point.
Yeah.
So getting up a lot of attempts, and then obviously if you're hitting a lot of them, even better. That's a huge difference. And I think in particular with last night's game, Aaron Gordon was hitting threes, which is, I mean, if Aaron Gordon is going to be hitting threes, Denver is almost impossible to beat. I mean, that's one of the very few weaknesses of that starting five. And he hit a few in a row, I think, in at some point when Minnesota was kind of gaining a little bit momentum to really slam the door shut, and the game was over from there. So I think shooting is huge in any game. I think that's part of why the Lakers series was as close as it was, because Denver really never caught fire in that series.
Yeah.
And they have the guys to do it. Like they have reliable 3-point shooters. They have a couple of great 3-point shooters. And so when they're on, that makes a huge difference. But all three of those guys defensively are super important too. And I've thought throughout the series that Kentavious Caldwell Pope is just too small to bother Anthony Edwards, and that's why I still kind of prefer the Brown matchup or the Gordon matchup. But I think it's awesome how personally KCP seems to be taking it, and he had some great moments on him defensively in Game 3, and even though he's maybe a little bit small for that matchup, he's still going to take it personally. He's still one of the best perimeter defenders in the league. and he kind of showed out on that front last night.
Yeah, it's so funny. All three of those guys on offense were crazy efficient. Like all of them scored twice the points that they had shots from the field, which is pretty amazing, which is like the best possible outcome for your role players. And then on the other side, they really did a lot of great things. One thing that's interesting to me, you mentioned that clunky combination of Gobert and Towns, and then you add to that Jaden McDaniels, who is not really a shooter, and that makes their offense really clunky. And yes, they're really long, and that's tough to contain. But on the other side, like if those guys are not super dynamic, outside of Conley and Anthony Edwards, that kind of makes the job for Nuggets defenders a bit easier, doesn't it?
Yeah, those are really the only two shot creators in that starting five is Conley and Edwards, and I think Towns can be at times, but there are also drives where he looks completely out of control. He's crashing into everything in sight. And so I don't, I imagine the Timberwolves don't want him creating much from scratch. Certainly McDaniels is not a creator at this point in his career. And there are nights where his shot can look terrible. I think he had one hit off the backboard last night, if I'm remembering correctly. If he's dialed it, it's kind of like Gordon. Like if McDaniels is hitting threes, Minnesota's a much different team, but you can't really rely on that if you're the Timberwolves because he has nights where it looks pretty rough.
One more guy I want to talk to you about is Justin Holiday. Are you surprised with his games so far in the playoffs? And it's not only like last game, it's been several games we've seen already. He's only averaging 3 points per game. And more interestingly, he has not hit a single 2-point shot so far in these playoffs. He's been only hitting 3-pointers at the 40% rate, 1 3-pointer per game. That's basically it. But he was also playing a very competent defense. What did you see from him? And is it a shame Denver doesn't have one more veteran like him?
In answer to the first question, yes. I am surprised by Justin Holiday. I mean, I kind of felt like his run in the NBA was done a couple of years ago. I mean, he was near the bottom of the league in a bunch of advanced stats. His season here in 23-24 could be a good reminder that those are oftentimes dependent on the situation that you're in.
Yes.
He was in a much better situation playing alongside Jokic this season. He didn't play a ton of minutes in the regular season, didn't get to 1,000, but he was solid. And he was another guy, I was talking to some media people before game 2 of the Wolves series, trying to figure out who on this roster can guard Anthony Edwards. And I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, what about Justin Holiday? And I thought, well, I just feel like he's too small too. He's very slight, especially in comparison to Edwards. But he's another guy who seems to be taking that matchup really personally. He's got a lot of length for a perimeter defender. I don't know what his wingspan is off the top of my head, but it sure seems like it's pretty good for his, height to wingspan ratio. And he's been so reliable as a catch and shoot guy. I'm surprised he's only making one a game. Honestly, it feels like, his presence feels bigger than that in this series, which is a credit to him. He's been great throughout the postseason whenever he's called upon. And it really is another credit to him that he had such a, shape-shifting kind of role throughout the regular season, and he's still been able to step up in the moments that he's given here in the playoffs. He's been great. And I think certainly in answer to the last question, I think it would have helped to have another veteran as part of this rotation. I think beyond experience, one of the things that Bruce Brown brought last season was just like intensity and attitude. I think they're missing a bit of that, and maybe some other veteran could have brought that too. But at the same time, I also understand what the front office is doing. And these reps that guys like Christian Brown and Peyton Watson are getting right now It may make some of these games this postseason feel a little bit less comfortable, but those guys are going to be better for it, 2, 3 years down the road, 6 months down the road, even. I don't know. Um, I understand why they took the approach that they did to trust the young guys.
Okay, moment of truth or prediction. What's going to happen in Game 4?
I think Denver's going to win. I'm not like a predictions guy, mostly because I just hate being wrong, and it's hard to predict this stuff. But I genuinely, honestly felt not great about the Nuggets before games 1 and 2. I didn't like make specific predictions about those games, but for whatever reason, I just thought, man, Minnesota killed Phoenix. They're big, they're athletic, they have the kind of defenders that can slow down Jamal Murray. And then for whatever reason, I felt kind of good about the Nuggets before game 3. All those things are still true, but Denver has the best player in the world, and they're just a better basketball team. Size and athleticism is not the end of the equation with basketball. It's one of the most skill reliant sports that we have. Football is about, there's obviously a lot of skill there, but it's more about brute strength and athleticism and knocking people over. The Nuggets have so many skilled players, and they know how their skills work with each other. Like, the continuity really is important. And you mentioned this earlier. That was Denver's 8th playoff game. It was the first time they looked like they realized they're the playoffs. Like, they finally were fully engaged for all 48 minutes. And maybe now that they've done that, they'll think, okay, if we just keep doing that, we'll be fine. I'm certainly not guaranteeing a win. I think Minnesota still has they can still cause the Nuggets some problems, but I do think Denver probably will and probably should win game 4. And all of a sudden we're kind of reset for a 3-game series.
So if the Nuggets win Game 4, would you expect then something similar to that Phoenix versus Milwaukee series where Phoenix wins first 2 and then practically gets swept after that?
I think so. Maybe the supercomputer has kind of figured this matchup out at that point. I will say, I just made my little spiel about how I hate doing predictions. I did predict this series, and I thought the Nuggets would win in 7. And so, I could see Minnesota. First of all, I could see Minnesota winning the series. I mean, it'd be crazy to say you can't. They're still up 2-1. But even if it goes back to Denver 2-2, I could still see Minnesota winning another game. It's just, despite the fact that we've already seen Minnesota win twice in Denver, it's hard to imagine that happening in a game 7. So that's why I defaulted to Nuggets in 7 on this one.
Yeah, one thing that frustrates me the most is my inner feeling that the Nuggets are in fact better, like solidly better team than the Timberwolves. It's just the fact that you need to be on top of your game if you want to win playoff games. Nobody is that much worse than you that you can just coast during the playoffs. So that's probably the biggest lesson they've hopefully already learned. Okay, let's take one more short break and then we'll jump around the league a bit. Don't go anywhere. Okay, Andy, just like a quick scan of the other semi-final series. What's the score right now between Dallas and OKC? I'm not following the game at all.
I think OKC's up 2 at halftime, up 1 at halftime.
Oh, okay. That series is going to 7, right?
That's another one I had going to 7, and I had Dallas winning that one in 7, and that means they're going to have to win a game 7 on the road, which is hard. But I'm one of those guys who just kind of trusts playoff experience, and Luka and Kyrie have a lot more than the Thunder did coming into this postseason. So that was kind of the tiebreaker for me on that one.
Yeah, my tiebreaker is just the fact that I kind of I don't trust Shea Gilgeous-Alexander in playoffs, because the refs are not going to give him as many like free throws as he got in the regular season. Luka is just the force of nature. He is. I think the difference between Joker and Luka is far smaller than between Luka and whoever you think the third best player in the league is. So I trust Luka immensely, and I was hoping, maybe not hoping, but expecting the Western Conference Finals between the Nuggets and Dallas Mavericks for a long
Be
time
a
now.
good series. Yeah.
It would be an awesome series. Okay, what about the lesser conference? Boston versus Cleveland and New York versus Indiana.
Even though Cleveland won comfortably in the last game, I would not be at all surprised to see that series finish up the way the Heat one did, where
9-5.
Boston
Yeah.
just kind of lets its guard down for one game and then gets back on track and dominates. There are, Cleveland poses more problems than Miami did, especially without Butler and without Porzingis. Like Evan Mobley's been really good in this series. And even though Boston has some great perimeter defenders, I'm not sure there is like a great answer for Donovan Mitchell the way he's playing right now. But I would expect Boston to hit a ton of threes in the next 3 games and probably wrap this up in 5 or 6. It's not very exciting, but it just seems to be following the same script as the Heat for me.
Yeah, I enjoy Celtics losses, not because I'm like have like this huge fear of. It's just the rants Bill Simmons is going on
Those are
every time
fun.
they lose.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and
like,
Celtics fans in general, you can tell they've been burned by this core so many times. And the amazing thing is that like Brown and Tatum are both, what are they, like 26 and 25 at this point? Like they still
yeah.
have plenty of time to win championships, but they've had some struggles in the biggest moments of the playoffs. Now they deserve credit for getting to those moments year after year after year. But it is funny to see how their fans react to, one loss to what I think is a pretty inferior team.
Okay, what about New York and Indiana?
That series is actually pretty entertaining to me just because I've kind of fallen for this Knicks team, and it started even before the playoffs. Um, I love how hard they play. I
Are,
am
are
starting
they
to get.
are they better without Randall?
I think you could make the argument that they are. I think Randall's a great player. He's not necessarily my kind of player. He's kind of like what we were saying with Karl Anthony Towns earlier. His drive seems so out of control to
Mhm.
me, and he gets a lot of assists. Um, but I think there's a difference between like team play and just racking up assists. Um, and I don't think he's a great defender. Like I absolutely think there's an argument that they're better with Randall, especially if you replace Randall's minutes with OG Anunoby's, whose game is way more streamlined than Randall's is, much better defender, much just smarter about the shots that he takes. But that's, now he's out with an injury. So that's kind of scary for the Knicks. I mean, it seems like they lose a rotation player every game and somehow they still keep winning. That series was kind of marred to me by the way that game 1 ended. I felt very dissatisfied with that moving screen call
Mhm.
that they called on Miles Turner. I thought that was an absolute joke. And it's obviously a different series if the road team wins game 1. So that kind of soured me on the series a little bit, but just in general, I've loved this Knicks playoff run. And I think if there's a team left in the East that can at least like challenge Boston in a series, it might be the Knicks. I think they have to have Anunoby to be able to
Yeah.
challenge them, and I don't know how long he's going to be out. But if he's playing, I think they can at least make Boston uncomfortable.
So you expect Boston and New York and Dallas and Denver. Yeah. That sounds about right. I I'm not making any different arguments there. Okay, for the end of the show, we have a game, and yes, we've been like saying a lot of bad stuff about Nikola Jokic, but fear no more. The game we are going to play today is
Ooh, I love
MJ
this.
or NJ. So I used to have a game last year where I was comparing Michael Jordan to LeBron James to Nikola Jokic. But you know what? LeBron James kind of his stats are amazing because of the cumulative stuff about him. Like he's been playing for what 40 seasons now. So of course he's holding all the longevity records there is. But I'm gonna ask you a series of pretty unserious questions, and you will just gonna try to guess who has the better stat between these two guys, Michael Jordan or Nikola Jokic. So this guy
Oh,
is the all-time playoff career box plus minus leader.
you
Playoff
know who you're.
career.
Oh, playoff. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad you clarified that because I was about to make a
I'm
fool
not
out of myself.
I'm not giving you easy
I was gonna
questions.
say, who do you think you're talking to? Number one in the regular season is Jokic. Number one in the
Yeah,
playoffs is Jordan.
that is correct. He is number one, 11.14. Nikola Jokic is number two all time, 10.55. So we'll see for
But
how long in MJ.
Jokic is going up. I think he's at like 13 or 14 this postseason, so it's going up.
Yeah, he is. He is. Nobody's beating like LeBron's 2009. I think he was like at 18 in that uh, postseason run, which is like insanity. But yeah, Joker is climbing there. Okay, second question: who has the higher career playoff 3-point percentage? So playoff
Mm.
3-point percentage.
I'm gonna say Jokic. Let me guess too. Oh, never mind. I
Oh,
saw
sorry. Yeah,
it.
yeah,
But I was
yeah.
gonna be wrong. I was gonna say 38 for his
Yeah,
playoff
he's
percentage.
still at 40%.
That's
Still at
crazy.
40%. And yeah, Michael Jordan is 33% in playoffs. I think he's actually a bit worse in regular season. And so is Joker, by the way. Like Joker is not shooting 40% in regular season. It's just that for some reason he doesn't seem to be really good in these playoffs from the 3-point line, but we'll see. We'll see.
Yeah.
Somehow he always climbs to that 40% mark, and I'm guessing he'll do that again. Okay, another one. Who has the higher career playoff free throw percentage?
Oh man. I'm gonna say Jordan on this one.
And you are going to be wrong because it's not a
Ah!
big difference. It's 1% difference. Joker has him at 84% and Joker at 80 and Jordan at 83%.
I wanted to get
Look, look,
100% on my
look,
quiz.
look how good these guys look next to each other. Like, could you imagine that kind of
The
tandem?
top, yeah, that's the top two players of all time right there.
Yes, and we are not getting ahead
Clip
of
it.
ourselves. Next question. This is interesting. Who had more career playoff games with 28 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists?
Mm.
So a LeBron, as you can call it. Like who had more LeBron games between Joker and
I'm gonna
Jordan?
go with Jokic on this one.
It's Michael Jordan. He is number 2 all time with
Oh, I
18.
read that wrong. Dang it.
18
Okay.
games. Joker is number 3 all time with 17, and I think LeBron has like 60. So
I thought
it's not really close. But
I
yeah,
thought
like
that Jokic had 3.17 such games for a second.
oh,
But now I get it.
he's third all time in these kinds
So
of games.
if they beat the Timberwolves, he should move up to second on that list, I would guess.
Yeah, very probably.
We'll see.
Which is a pretty cool little list to
It's
be
crazy.
high on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like Michael Jeffrey Jordan, man. Like Michael Jordan.
Crazy.
Okay, next question. Who had more career playoff games with 10 or more assists?
I want to say, I mean, that my hesitance on the last one that was that Jordan just had more playoff runs.
Yeah, and almost double the minutes of Joker's playoff so far.
Okay. Gosh. But still. All right. I'm going to go with Jokic.
Again, Jordan.
Ah!
He's 22nd all
He's
time
like-
with 20 such games. Joker is 23rd all
He's
time
like
with
this
19
far behind in the
such
3
games.
ones that I missed. Dang it.
Yeah. I know. I'm evil. Sorry.
These are close.
So I believe Magic Johnson is here number one with like 160 such games.
Oh my gosh. Where's Stockton on that list? Do you have it pulled up?
I don't have it in front of me, but yeah, of course he should be top
Be high.
two,
Yeah.
probably. Yeah, like top two, not further than that.
It
Yeah, I
is.
don't
It
have
really
the
is crazy to see how close Jokic already is to Jordan.
already is. Yeah,
What in his career?
already
It's
is.
crazy.
I think we have one or more, two questions. Who had more career playoff games with 10 or more rebounds?
Okay, I'm gonna go Jokic on this one with a little bit more confidence. It's got to be
Yeah,
Jokic.
That sounds about right. And it
Okay.
is. He has had 55 such games. He's only 35th all time in that.
That's
You know
pretty
why?
crazy.
It's because like in 50s and 60s,
Yeah,
nobody
you've got Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Elgin
Yeah,
Baylor. All those guys were
nobody
averaging like 20
nobody was
rebounds.
making anything, so there were a
Yeah.
lot of available rebounds in those
Well, they
games.
weren't. Not only were they not making anything, they were putting up the pace back then. They were shooting it
Oh, yeah.
like within 5-10 seconds every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the Wilt's like single game record for rebounds? Something like 55,
50?
I think.
I think it's 55. Yep,
50.
pretty sure.
I mean,
And he had a
like,
season where he averaged 25. Like, it's crazy. I think
Yeah,
Russell
yeah.
might have a couple seasons around there too.
yeah. So Michael Jordan is not close. Actually, he's 119th on this list with 21 such games. Still pretty big number for a guard. And yeah, that's all. That's all I have prepared.
So I hope I got
for-
at least. Did I get 50% of those right? At least.
I
hopefully.
think you had 4 out of 6, which is. I mean, considering how mean some of the questions were, like how close of a margin
The
there
ones I
was.
missed were so close.
Yeah, like the thinnest margin possible.
Yeah.
So, okay, Andy, before we go, would you like to plug something from your work?
Just keep following me on, is it Twitter or X these days? Keep following me on there at Andrew D. Bailey and keep reading my stuff on Bleacher Report. That's where I'm at.
Excellent. So that's all we have prepared for you today, and you should take the word prepared very loosely. Like Andy was faced with my questions live on program. I gave him nothing before. I was constantly putting him on the spot, and like
Well, it's very easy to talk hoops with you, Miroslav. I mean that. Like, I love
you
coming
so
on this show.
Thank you so much. So once again, I'd like to thank all of my Patreon supporters at patreon.com/MiroslavCuk, and also to give a shout out to my Sicko tier of supporters, and those are Peter Plummer, Daniel Lynch, and Pavel Mihailovic. Be safe, be kind to everybody, call your mom, and until next weekend, Will Barton.